Welcome back, little helpers. Today we are doing an oft-requested episode on laziness. So I was excited to talk about this because that's a word I've hurled at myself a lot. I think a lot of actually overachievers tend to hurl that word at themselves, which is a little bit ironic, but it also kind of makes sense if we think about, how we fear we are. And a lot of people reached out about this, wondering about its associations with ADHD, whether it even exists at all. So I figured, why not do an episode on it? Kibby, do we have a definition of laziness?
Not really.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's surprising what a popular topic this is, but looking at the research, it's just like not a lot of good stuff. So I found one common sense definition of laziness, and that's when if we think a person's lazy, we think that they have the abilities to do well in a certain task or activity, but doesn't actually do it because he or she does not bother. I love that. Does not bother. So, I mean, there's different parts of that definition. There's the individual's performance, like what he or she does in a task. Two is like what you think that person can do, like their perceived abilities. And the difficulty of the task, like can they actually do the task? And the third part of that definition is the person's motivation or effort in a given task, right? And so they're all kind of, you got the first two, but you don't have the last one, and that's what we think of as lazy, I think.
So it's a pretty bad definition, but in its defense, it's very hard to give a definition for a lack of something.
Yeah.
So laziness isn't additive. Laziness is just like kind of, what is it? I mean, it's just not doing something. Like, how do we know if somebody is lazy or not?
Yeah, and I didn't really understand if it meant a task or expectation that individual has for themselves, like you have a goal that you're not doing, or is it that society or other people think they should do it? Like that person should get out of the house, get out of their mom's house, go get a job, apply themselves, and they're not. So that's, so where is that goal coming from? And then do we know that they're capable of doing it?
Do they know that they're capable of doing it?
Right.
Self-efficacy beliefs are a huge part of why people procrastinate.
Yeah. Yeah. Just so for people to know, that self-efficacy beliefs are, do you believe that you can do something, right? Very simple. But yeah, your belief that you could actually do something, where that might not always be at the surface, or you might not always be aware that you have self-efficacy or not,
I mean, I know that's a huge factor in why I sometimes procrastinate or why I won't go over something, is because I've always had low self-efficacy beliefs. So, I mean, that just right there makes the definition really complicated, because explicitly stated in the definition is that the person can do the thing. Yeah. But how does anybody know whether that person can do the thing? Sometimes it's easier to tell than others. I think this point about the goal is really interesting. Like, who is setting this goal? Why do we believe that this goal needs to be achieved? Why do we believe that this person needs to achieve the goal? There's a lot of talk in this extremely sparse literature. Maybe I shouldn't say a lot of the talk. When I was sort of rifling through, I saw some talk about the cultural aspects here in our Western Christian society, where laziness is one of the 7 deadly sins. There is but especially in the kind of American society, we're so work oriented, and so and we talk a lot about like lazy island cultures or lazy like Italians or sort of these other cultures, and it's like, well, what is it? Laziness, or is it that we're way too skewed towards work as a value? Yeah. And other people might be more skewed towards actually enjoy the one life you have. Yeah. Yeah. I love that you bring that up. That is a cultural piece, because this country has a lot of this Protestant work ethic value, which is, basically it's like,
your productivity is a sign of godliness, is a sign that you're blessed and you're chosen, right? The more successful you are, the better, the more like divine you are, right? So it's just like linking hard work and that kind of achievement and success with good, right? And so as you're saying, like having a lack of that is seen as bad in this culture. But even just my time in Italy, what you're saying is right, that they're like, we only have this one life, right? Like, let's enjoy our family. Let's enjoy this food. Let's take our time. Why rush to work? So that's just like a very different set of values. And that's so like, who is being lazy here? That is just two different groups of people who are dedicating their time and energy to something that they believe is valuable, right?
Right. I think so much of this also is what you believe is possible. So, if you take really poor families, for instance, so some of the articles were talking about beliefs towards the unemployed. Are they lazy? Maybe. And maybe some people don't believe in the possibility of achieving very much. Or there's trust issues with employers, with the government, with the majority race, with whatever the case may be. Yeah. And so it can be difficult to find the motivation when it's like, okay, all I can do is work my ass off day in and day out and not really further my circumstances that much. And I don't know if that's lazy or if that's just like, it's not worth it.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of how much I feel like such a crotchety old woman when I think about this, but like it's always like the younger generation are so much lazier than we are. Like we worked, we probably didn't work as hard as, the generations before, but to like go to war and, the baby boomers. But it just, there's just like there's this perception that the younger generations like Gen Z are lazier because they like vacation more. They like the work-life balance. They don't do this kind of like kill yourself kind of type of work, right? Like overworking that other generations did. But at the same time, we're at a time when you can work so hard and still not afford to buy a house for years, whereas like people in the previous generations did, right? So like as you're saying, is it worth it? Like the effort you put in to something, you hope to get something out of it. And there's this cool theory in like work motivation. It's called expectancy theory. And the idea is that an employee will work hard if they, one, believe that high effort will lead to a successful task performance. So they expect they will do well if they put in effort. And two, believe that the performance will lead to high rewards. Like they'll actually get something out of it, and they actually want the rewards is the last piece, right? So that all kind of makes sense, but it's like, well, if I work hard, will I get the thing? Is that thing something that I want? Yeah. And a lot of the times, no,
It's interesting. This can be a bit taboo to talk about, but IQ is a bell curve, and if you are at the lower end of the IQ spectrum, it might be difficult to believe that you're going to get massively rewarded for what you do because you don't have the ability to attain higher education or something like that. And so I could see there being a circular effect there where it's like already this economy, you need so much money to get a house and I don't have the intellectual capability to get one of those jobs in the first place. So what am I looking forward to?
Yeah. So you're basically looking at the behavior of not doing something, not bothering. Even though people think that they can do it, right? So it's going to look like laziness, but it's really like, it's just not, the juice is not worth the squeeze kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have other characteristics, like, I don't want to be too biased on the laziness isn't a thing side. Everybody is just working with what they have. Maybe that's true, but also you and I are both afraid of laziness for a reason. There's something in us that kind of intrinsically believes it.
I don't know. I actually don't know if you're lazy. I actually don't. You talk about it a lot. So I just have in my head, I'm like, yeah, Jacqueline's lazy. But like, when we're actually like breaking it down, I'm like, is she? Because you do a lot. You're very active. When you want something, you definitely go for it. You're in like a PhD program, even in and of itself, right? So,
yeah, I mean, this is an example of me handing people a narrative and then being shocked when they believe it or read it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's another aspect of this, is how much of it is just our own self-concept being promoted to other people and then them seeing that. Realistically speaking, I've done a lot with my life. I'm in a top-tier PhD program. I have done well in the PhD program. I take more patients than anybody else in the program. I read a lot of literature. I have an active social life. I paint. I work out, etc. That's not the profile of a lazy person. I'm comparing myself to certain peers and believing that I'm biased to see certain indicators of them working harder than me. Because
like what?
I put myself,
what's the picture of someone who's not lazy versus you?
not procrastinating, which I think is so funny also because in this, again, sparse literature, it seemed like laziness and procrastination were being conflated.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think that's necessarily a good idea.
No, I agree with you. When I was like looking up research on laziness, I got a lot of procrastination literature, and it's just like, that just means that their style of working is that they wait a long time and then do things at the last minute. But people who are like, yeah, exactly. It's like, is that they're not bothering. They're just doing it in a way that, you know, causes a lot of stress or is not efficient, whatever. So yeah, you're right.
I would say another marker is I tend to have difficulty figuring things out on my own sometimes. It's like I get insecure and flustered very quickly, and so I'll like ask for help a lot. And so when other people figure out things, you know, just quickly or naturally or whatever. But I mean, I think this is why people brought in ADHD so much, is because people with ADHD, and I don't know if you relate to this, but there's just so much negative self-talk that comes with it because there's been so much prodding from teachers, parents, whoever. When I say I have negative self-beliefs about this, and it's because I'm comparing myself to others, I mean, my sister was a Harvard-trained doctor. My brother is a lawyer at the State Department and a diplomat. You know what I mean? My other brother has a potato chip company. But anyway, I was always comparing myself to them. And finding that I couldn't get the 4.0, you know, I couldn't. I was rejected from the colleges, etc.
I see. So it's just like you are just like didn't have the same exact academic achievements as they are. So that's how you thought you're lazy.
I think they're also more internally motivated. Or they were for a while, which I think is also a confusing distinction. So internal motivation is when you are kind of motivated from just yourself, like
your interests. Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so much fun. I'm doing it because I enjoy it. I'm doing it because it's going to make me feel good. Versus external motivation is you're motivated more by like a reward. So when my parents had to pay me to get good grades in high school versus my sister just did it, it's like, was she internally motivated and I was externally motivated, or was she raised in such a way that she got so much reward from getting praise from my parents that it became internalized? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I think they also call it intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, but I think that it's confusing to really parse apart what's internal and what's external for that particular reason, right? Like, if you take an interest in something because someone you love is also interested in it and it just gets you, and it makes you feel connected to them and you like it a lot, then does that mean it's intrinsic or extrinsic? And a lot of our interests are shaped by social influences, right? Like, what is your older brother like, right? So
yeah, exactly.
And yeah, it's like extrinsic motivation is usually in research like something, like you said, a reward or like a gold star or something that's really quantified, like a grade or money. And it's crazy in the literature too, because they show that if someone is doing a task and they're given not a lot of money to do it, they think they actually like the task more. But if they're given more money to do it, they like the task less. So adding extrinsic motivation or like external rewards like that will actually decrease intrinsic motivation. That's like an
so
old study.
interesting.
Yeah. So like with students, that's, some people are questioning the way we do, anything with education, because if you're always giving external motivation, then students who might just enjoy this subject or might like learning are doing it just for the grade.
I wonder if the mechanism is like the high external motivation almost distracts away from the internal motivation, or if it's almost like it sends the message you need to be rewarded more for this.
Yeah. So I think that's what they think it is. I think I think the authors explain it like we're just used to a world where you're externally rewarded for like a lot for something unpleasant, right? Like someone's got to pay a lot for a really unpleasant task.
Right.
So you're like, woo, I'm getting paid a lot for this. This must be a crappy job.
What would be interesting is to see what happens to internal motivation for like med students before and after residency. So like when they're getting paid shit versus afterwards when they go in private practice or something, to see if they actually hate patient care more. I mean, that would surprise me, but do you feel like less motivated to see patients now that you're paying for it?
I feel like we all justified being paid low in academia for a long time because we get to do what we love and get to find something interesting, right? To like pursue our passions. And so we're paid like very, very low wages. And so versus like I always thought like boring jobs, quote, quote, boring jobs that are high paid, right? But like less like intellectually stimulating. And that was my way that I justified. I was like, oh, this is such low external rewards that it must be internally driven.
So that's exactly what we were talking about.
Yes, yeah.
All right, so we just need to stop paying people.
Jeez.
But that goes against what we were saying earlier, that people are more motivated to do. But I mean, I guess you're not saying that you were more motivated back then, just that maybe your internal motivation was higher.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think you can't say one is better than the other. I mean, I think you could probably guess that extrinsic motivation is probably less sustainable because once they stop giving you the grades, it's probably not interesting. But so does internal motivation. That waxes and wanes too. So I don't know. I think we just value being intrinsically motivated and being, driven by passion and interest versus external rewards. But honestly, all the motivation theories have a part of like, are people getting rewarded for this? Like, are they actually getting something desirable? So, that has to be given by the work environment or the environment itself.
Yeah, let's come back to that because I think there's an interesting conversation to be had around motivation at work and like what employers can do to motivate their employees. To bring back in like the kind of the ADHD discussion, when you have ability concerns, that makes the laziness conversation kind of interesting. I mean, it can be very easy to call yourself lazy if you're reading a scientific paper and 3 sentences in, you're Googling why cats smell good, which is what I did an hour ago.
Why do they smell good? I don't think so. I don't agree, but...
Well, one article was like, it's probably just because you love them.
Good, done. No more Googling necessary. Going back to my work now.
But so funny. That sends me a message every time I try to work on my dissertation or do anything. I'm like, can I seriously not get through 5 sentences of a paper without going for something more immediate that just takes up way less brain power?
Yeah.
So I think there's all of these messages that our own kind of abilities send to us, and in a society that maybe isn't as obviously rewarding for like ADHD type strengths, it can be easy to see your deficits all the time. An easy example is that this society rewards morning owls. Night owls often feel like lazier than morning larks. And all it is a circadian rhythm difference, which was evolutionarily necessary that we have both in society. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this getting up, or like that's part of the Protestant work ethic. Getting up early, getting working on the land. That's seen as good. So it's really like laziness is, now we're talking about like, is just a word to like poorly characterize people who are not doing something we think they should.
Yeah. I mean, procrastination is another one. I would love for procrastinators to examine whether it's truly served them badly. And it probably has sometimes. And then we pay greater attention to that because we're threat detectors. But if it's mostly been okay, then what it's maybe done is just save you a ton of time when you otherwise would have been doing something unpleasant. I mean, that's possible, right? That like, because you procrastinated, you had a whole week to enjoy yourself and then 1 to 2 days of pain versus a whole week of pain.
Well, you're getting into something too where when you think about laziness or any kind of behavior, what is reinforcing it, right? Like if you're constantly doing something, this is what we learned in, CBT, where if you're doing something over and over again, it's a pattern, or the behavior is increasing, it's being reinforced. Right. So if you're procrastinating, right, and then keep doing it, there's something that's reinforcing about that. Yeah. For me, procrastination was reinforcing because when I heard this is also an ADHD thing, that when you're down to the wire and you have a deadline, the pressure made me lock in and focus on it.
Same.
In a way that I didn't if I just did it like every, like a little bit every day as they tell you to do. So I was just I was reinforced by the pattern of that I actually do decent work, but I feel like I'm under pressure.
I completely agree with you in that you actually get kind of a high from it of being able to write 10 pages in a night. It's like, holy shit, I'm capable of that. And I always get to the place where I'm like, God, I wish I just had one more day. I should have started a day earlier. And then the next time I'll try to start a day earlier, but I'm just incapable of that same sort of flow state. And so, I agree. It's like the only way to access that power is to procrastinate. And if that's true, that's really not laziness. You're still doing the thing. It's just doing it in a different way.
Yeah.
However, I have to say there does seem to be a dark side to laziness. And I mean, a couple things that I can think of are sometimes laziness looks like allowing your partner to do everything. Sometimes laziness looks like manipulating other people or taking other people for granted. Sometimes laziness looks like an inability to put long-term consequences first.
Right. And
that's not being a bad person, but that is associated with negative outcomes.
Right. It's still the laziness, quote, quote, is still being rewarded. But it could be like short-term benefits of like you're doing something that's more fun or enjoyable versus doing something that's hard that might contribute to the family or someone. I mean, when we were thinking about this episode, the first thing that popped in my mind was my ex. Talk about him a lot, but I think he also describes himself sometimes as lazy, but that was really my bugaboo about it. I was like, I feel like he's lazy, but I couldn't tell if it's because I'm setting a goal for him to get a job and he says he wants to get a job, but he actually doesn't. And so his maybe like he has two different values or two different goals that are in conflict and one's winning out. And the thing is that his laziness, his like not getting a job or not contributing in ways that I asked for, were being reinforced by me when I was like just paying for the bills or just getting food for him or like taking care of him. Right. Yeah. And if he were to step up and actually do those things, like he would have, like those rewards of being taken care of would have been taken away.
Yes.
And I hadn't even thought about that as clearly as I did until I went to internship and I was working with all these narcissistic patients and learning like a new way to treat personality disorders. And my supervisors were just like, I mean, they saw that some of my patients were that kind of like failure to launch, where they were smart, bright, capable, but they just were depressed and living off of their partner and couldn't get their act together. And why am I like this? Right. And it pulled a lot of sympathy from me. But it was interesting. These patients were also ones who like didn't show up on time, didn't do their homework. Like, and I was working harder and harder. I was like, every other patient I would schedule where you're coming in on Tuesday at 12, we'll meet then. And I would just, we would just show up. With those kind of patients, I would text a gentle reminder, being like, hey, just checking. I'm not sure if I got it in my calendar correctly. Are we meeting tomorrow at 12? And I was doing all these things to kind of like reinforce the laziness, or, you want to say like non-behavior or non-engagement. By taking care and like taking up the slack and putting in that effort. So yeah, I mean, this is like kind of like the tips to loved ones. Like if you are frustrated by someone's laziness, kind of check yourself to see if you're reinforcing it in any way.
Yeah, such a common pairing that I see in therapy is because often anxious people come to therapy, anxious people who like to control their circumstances. And so therapy is a way of controlling their circumstances.
Yeah.
So I look at these like anxious, over-controlled, very conscientious patients, and they will always talk about their ADHD husbands. I've had like so many of these. And they always wind up.
It's funny that you say husbands. I'm
trying to think if I've had more female patients than male patients is probably part of it. But, well, and it's interesting for me to listen to this because I'm an ADHD woman and I have a partner who's very anxious, over-controlled, and conscientious. So when I listen to this, I'm feeling like a measure of guilt, like, but it's always, I do so much for the house. I take over, I'm the one who has to keep everything together. And then there's a coming to terms with like, I think my ADHD partner just doesn't see the things that I see. They just don't. And I think what happens is like the ADHD brain is different. And it doesn't see things in the same way. So I, for instance, don't see something until it piles up a lot of the time. Or maybe it's in front of my face and then I get distracted and I move on to something else and that ceases to be in front of me. But I also live capably alone. And so do these people's partners. Before the partner came, the husband lived capably alone. And so what would it be like to pull back some of that care and nurturance and doing things for them? They'd probably be okay. The dynamic might be difficult, though, because once it's set in, it's kind of hard.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that if, let's take a really pessimistic view of my ex being lazy, right?
Sure.
I mean, if we're talking about me being like controlled or like controlling, I hope I'm not, but I wanted things to be done a certain way, right?
Yes.
And if my ex or someone else doesn't do it in that way, then it's like, oh, they're lazy,
right?
For example. And that's very different than if that person is just going to do something, right? I think that's the issue where sometimes in that dynamic, one person wants to be done a certain way and the other person is not doing it in that way. And if you truly want to have more of a balance and not take on all the emotional labor, the over-controlled partner needs to be like, okay, that person is just going to be in charge of the trash, or they're going to be in charge of, this part of the house, and it's not going to be done the way that I would do it, but it'll be done in their way and it'll be done.
Yes.
So that's the idea behind it. I'll still give myself credit that I don't think what I was asking for was that difficult or something that he didn't agree to, but I'm just characterizing myself as like, let's say I wanted things to be done exactly my way and I would just call my partner lazy if they didn't do it that way, right? That would be a problem.
Yeah,
it's all a problem. But,
it's so tough because I defend the quote lazy person, but all of us know that guy who sits in the lazy boy drinking beers and watching TV all day while the wife does everything, or you know, just that image.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what can we say about that? I mean, we could say that, I don't know, that person maybe has like cultural customs where the woman does all the housework or serves the man. We could say that they don't have big dreams because they weren't taught to. We can say of ourselves, we both come from parents who were very much like, we will love you unconditionally, but we won't respect you unconditionally.
Yeah.
You know, like there are expectations that we succeed and achieve, and that gets built in. And if other people don't have that, then is that laziness? Well, maybe it is. I mean, at some point, if work's not getting done and the person isn't doing anything, can we just conceptualize that as laziness? Even though it's kind of a truncated story because it doesn't tell you much about what's really going on under the surface.
Yeah, and then mental health. If you put mental health in the mix, it makes things even more confusing. I mean, what we're talking about with laziness is a person doing something we think that they can do? No, right? But we don't. What we don't know is why. Why is that person like saying that person's lazy doesn't describe anything about what's going on?
Yeah.
In terms of that whole set of behaviors. So the things that I get really confused about that I was kind of, I don't know. I think this what got in the way was like, if someone says, I have mental health issues, I'm depressed, I have ADHD or something like that. That's why I'm not able to get a job, do this thing, whatever. I am quick to forgive. But then over time, when does it cross over to like, okay,
right,
or that's no longer an excuse. Like if, you know, when is it like understanding that a person who's depressed is not capable of doing as much as they were able to when they're not feeling depressed. But at some point, when do you change that expectations, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like, okay, there's the perspective of the person who's depressed, and then there's the perspective of the other person. So the person who's depressed, it's genuinely so hard to get anything done. It's genuinely so hard. And that could be on, you know, day 4 of depression or day 4,000 of depression. You still have the same excuse. It's still so hard. It's still so much harder for you than for other people. But if you're the person observing the depressed person, at what point do you just go, okay, I've had enough? You know, like I can't, this excuse isn't good enough for me anymore. This doesn't work for me anymore.
I don't know how to answer that. Yeah. I mean, with my ex, I was like, you know, both of our goals I thought was for him to get a job. And then he was like, oh, I'm so depressed and anxious. It's so hard for me to do that. And then he would spend all day for months smoking weed and playing guitar and shopping for more guitar parts. And so like, is that laziness? Like, it seemed really goal-driven to me. It seems really oriented towards things that were really important to him. But then at some point, like, what do I do? You know, what do I say? BS, you're not actually depressed? I mean, you know? Yeah. So it's hard for the loved ones. It's hard to... the laziness, that word comes in when you're just angry. When you're angry that maybe a shared group goal is not... It reminds me of this group dynamics literature, of this concept of social loafing, which I love that concept. There's all this literature on why are groups not actually that good at being creative together. Like when you want a think tank or you want like a brainstorming session, it's actually not a good idea to have a group. Yeah. Because of all these different processes that happen. And one of them is social loafing, where it basically describes when you add more people to a task, an individual's effort will go down because they're just like, well, we have a whole group here. I don't have to pull, you know, a certain amount of weight that if I were an individual. So, I
have to think that so much of that is also, I mean, yes, I don't have to put in as much effort, but for me, it would depend on what the task is. For some, I would definitely be like, I'm going to disappear into the shadows. You guys take this one. But for other tasks, I think that my insecurity would come up so high because suddenly I'm having to present my ideas to like 5 other people.
Yeah. Yes.
And measure them up and have them discarded. And that whole process would make me so insecure that I could see paring back my own effort.
I distinctly remember that one of the first times we hung out, we all went to a escape room in Durham.
Yeah.
And it was so funny to watch. So it was like a couple of us in the lab, and you, and we went to to this escape room. And you, from the outset, you were dolled up. You had this like adorable dress on. You like looked beautiful and dainty, and you're wearing heels. And you're like, I can't do escape rooms. I can't. I'm no good at them. I'm not going to be any help. I'm not going to be. You're just insisting that you're just going to be like just standing in the middle of the room doing nothing. And sure enough, when we got in there, you just stood in the middle of the room and like refused to do anything. But then, and we're all like, running around and, getting things. But eventually you just start to point to things and say, well, why don't you try to put that key in that? Why don't you try doing that? And you actually like unlocked a couple of puzzles. Like you actually helped with the escape room. And I think that was the first time I thought to myself, this girl's interesting.
You know what's funny is in my memory, I didn't help at all the entire time.
You did. You unlocked like 2 things that we were stuck on. You're like, why don't you put that crown over there? And then it opened up a thing. And I remember looking at you and being like, what? What do you mean you can't do escape rooms? And I was like, I think this girl could do more than she thinks.
Yeah, that's a nice story.
But yeah, it's like you acting like, oh God, I'm so lazy, I can't do anything. And then you actually can. So your self-efficacy beliefs are low.
I know. I don't know what happened to me in my childhood. I must have, I wonder what the like core memory is of just abject failure in front of everyone at something that has made me convinced I'm incompetent.
Well, it's like the way you describe, at least the way you describe the way you see your siblings is like, you're this like adorable, cute, fun, pretty one. And then all these people are like, Harvard doctors, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, powerful and can do anything. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. And these kinds of beliefs, like, they can really just... I mean, so another motivation for... another reinforcement of procrastination is the idea that if you wait until the last minute and you don't put much effort in, then you won't be blamed. You can't blame yourself for a real failure. You can you can blame yourself for laziness, which is less painful than being stupid.
Yeah, so it's like self-sabotaging. Tendencies.
So it's just with laziness, it's so interesting. There's so many different levels to look at. Beliefs about the self, beliefs about what's motivating, about what you can possibly achieve, beliefs about your own capability, not even beliefs, just the objective truth about your own capabilities, the culture you're in, the what else? I don't know, other stuff. The partnership you're in, the parents you come from, what you're most rewarded for. I mean, sometimes people go for competitive advantage. I mean, I see a lot of hot girls will go for the competitive advantage of being hot, and they'll kind of let their intellect slide a little bit. They'll develop the Valley Girl accent. They'll kind of puff up pieces that say I'm not very smart. And that's an interesting thing to do. Yeah, and the opposite, where people of, different kind of minority groups, right, with like racism, where it's just like, oh, they're so lazy, XY people are so lazy, why don't they get jobs? It's like, well, we don't know if they're able to. We don't know if they don't have the same hiring rates, right. Like there's racial bias in the hiring. And also if they've have messages where they aren't capable of doing it, then technically they're not lazy because they just are not doing things that they were told that they can't do. Right. Why would you try?
Yeah.
For any of these things. Yeah. And I mean, knowing that you have to work doubly hard to achieve something that a white person can achieve is like, okay, do I really want to do that?
Is that worth it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about motivation. So one article I read was talking about these 3 sources of motivation in the workplace. One is power, one is achievement, and one is affiliation.
Yeah, this is the McClellan's 3 needs theory.
Okay. Do you want to tell us more about it?
I mean, you kind of nailed it.
Okay, so so power is kind of, I mean, it's the desire for power, right? It's the desire, I guess, to be respected, to be seen as, to be lionized, to be a leader, and they tend to be pretty internally motivated, self-starters, and sort of natural leaders. Mm-hmm. The second group is achievers, so they like to have some sort of product that is very interesting to them. Mm-hmm. Am I doing a good job at this? I'm kind of ad-libbing from memory.
Yeah. Okay. They like challenging situations, and they set themselves hard to reach goals and work towards them, right? So, achieving objectives, yeah.
And then the third group is affiliators. So they are looking for social affiliation. They're good at cooperation, working with groups. And does this go so far as to say that, like, I mean, will they do achievements so that they can be accepted by others? Like, are they looking for being accepted, or are they just better at doing things as a team?
I don't know if anyone's like better. This is basically saying like what they're motivated by. So like if someone is driven by the need for affiliation, they might get power or objectives, but the end goal would be to be accepted and to be like socially in a group, right? Belong to a group. Right. So, I mean, it's like the idea is that everyone has these three needs, but I think it's like some people may be more inclined to have one or the other, or they might be motivated in a particular time, right? Like you might be like, okay, in this time in your life, you have the need for power, and then that shifts over time or something like that.
Which one of these are you?
Oh, gosh. Affiliation.
Yeah? How can you tell?
Affiliation and achievement. But I feel like when I do these like values exercises on myself, I want to achieve things or get power or anything because it means I can belong to like a group, or that I could work with people I like. Like I worked so hard in grad school, like publishing papers or getting the grant, doing whatever you need to do, only because I really wanted to stay at Duke and work with the group I was in, with Zach, with our lab. You know, I was just like, oh, I just feel so at home here. Aww. How do I stay here? Oh, I have to work my ass off and get a good CV to do that. Or at least have the option to do that, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like, ooh, if I do this, I get to have power over a group of other people and get to like really, have people enact my vision. Like that really, I will do that, but that's not something that like I crave.
It's so funny. I can't wait till Zach's not my boss anymore. Not because he's a bad boss. He's an awesome boss. But because I don't want to be assessed anymore. I have like a limit for how many years I can have a boss, I think. That I'm like, okay, we need to change this relationship. I need to start fresh.
Well, then what are you? What need for power, achievement, or affiliation?
Know. I'm trying to figure it out because
What are you?
I don't know. I mean, my natural inclination was affiliation, but I specifically want a job where I have no colleagues or bosses, where it's just me. However, I think like a big part of my work is to be affiliated with colleagues in a larger sense, or with a cohort of people who is intelligent, driven, respected, etc. But my second inclination is achievement, but that's funny because I really don't need too much recognition for my career. Like, I don't want to be a researcher. I don't need to be famous. Part of that is because I was famous and I found out how much it sucks and how awesome it is, but a lot of how much it sucks. And so, but the reason I say achievement is that I'm driven by how interesting psychology is. And so I do feel like I'm driven by the work itself. However, a huge driver is money. And I don't know if that's power or what.
I think that's why I was going to say that. I think that's more achievement, because I feel like achievement is not necessarily, according to this theory, it's not about prestige or, being awesome or being, like looked upon in that. It's not necessarily like reputation. It's just I want a task, I want a goal, and I'm going to go get it. Right. Yeah. And so for you, you've always talked about starting a practice and making money and being able to support a family. That's very much objectives, right? You don't say, "Ooh, I could do that so I could, lead a bunch of people," and
right, that'd be power.
Right. Or you don't necessarily say, "Oh, you do have the affiliation that you want to build a family." You've always talked about that. So, but I definitely think that you're achievement oriented. You definitely have goals and you go for them.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Even if it's money. Right. So I guess in terms of, the tips, the reason why this theory was there, and a lot of other kind of theories in organizational psychology is a whole field that we're not totally familiar with, but we know a little bit about. But according to this 3 needs theory, if you are a boss or if you are trying to motivate employees or someone, you figure out what that person particularly needs and help them achieve it, right? And you could watch how people are just motivated by different things. So someone who has a high need for affiliation might spend a lot of time networking, making friends, but they might not be achieving in the same way that you want them to. So just kind of take that like individual differences into account.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if like what Zach could take from my work or my like motivational needs of, I mean, I will say because I don't crave power, I tend not to extend myself too much beyond what's going to take me towards my goal.
I think if you said something like, if your dissertation is a success, you can probably charge more as a therapist or
right,
for workshops, right? It was like, if you're able to publish your paper, you could charge like $100 more for workshop fees.
Yeah, I mean, he said things like that though, and it doesn't necessarily work. I think just because I'm not just looking for as much money as possible, maybe because I don't believe it, but I'm very much interested in not getting as much money as possible, but getting as much money for the lowest amount of possible effort. Finding that intersection. In other words, I don't want...
It's called entitlement? No, I'm kidding.
It's not called entitlement. It's called being savvy.
It's called working smart, not hard.
Yeah, exactly. It's called the A- method, which I have always been a proponent of, which is an A- is basically going to get you to the same location as an A. My God. So why go for the A?
No, I'm the opposite.
Yeah, I know we're the opposite.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, this is easy and I'm good at it and people like me when I do it. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the thing that's painful and hard and I'm not good at yet and I have to compete with others who are better than me.
Yeah, well, that's very admirable in this Western Protestant.
No, it's not. It's inefficient and painful for everyone involved.
Yeah, I mean, meanwhile, I know why cats smell good. It's because I love them so much.
We learn from each other, that's why.
Anything else that we have on motivation? I mean,
sure. I have one more. I have one more. Hertzberg's motivation theory. This is all taking from my EPPR licensing exam studying. Okay. Yeah. This is all stuff that we learned from that. Okay, so there are 2 different kinds of... category needs when it comes to work: hygiene and motivators. I think it's just it's kind of a weird word for it, but hygiene refers to like a person's work environment, like working conditions, very basic stuff like pay, wages, workplace relations, right? Like just basic, like how is your workplace and how is like the general healthiness of that, right? And then there are motivators that are factors that motivate people to work harder, like job recognition, promotion, achievement, or like challenge, intellectual challenge. So this theory came about because they said if the first thing, hygiene, doesn't actually motivate people to do well, but if it's not there, people are really unmotivated. right? They quit, right? If you don't pay them well, if you don't give them, benefits or vacation, then they're going to be unmotivated and they want to leave. But if you give them all those things, it doesn't mean they're going to like strive for better. They're just going to be there. The things that do help people feel motivated are those kind of like challenges, those giving people autonomy, giving people like achievement and like promotions and things like that. So it's interesting to think about. It's not just like one thing that makes people motivated or not motivated. It's just like you need some like basic needs for people to just stay there, and then what do you need to do extra to keep your employees like actually working hard.
Right. I mean, when I was in my last UX internship that made me so depressed, like I think the primary problem was that I just didn't feel invested in any way, and so I felt like a nuisance, and I just felt like kind of a thing. It was just there, and so I didn't have the basic need met of feeling worthy. And so I had to put all my effort into just kind of getting to the ground level. Before I could even think about achieving. I think, so if we think about like tips that we can give people who feel lazy, or I don't know, people who are trying to help their partner or friend or something with laziness. I mean, one is to really examine what's going on. Like if you say that you're lazy because you procrastinate, then maybe the thing to do is accept that you procrastinate and that it works for you. Now, that's not true for everybody. Some people really need to stop procrastinating. But I think there's a subset of people, and I think ADHD can fall into this, where it's like, examine whether you are biased towards your deficits or towards your strengths, and just maybe try to like balance that if you can. So, I mean, I've had success working with ADHD where it's like, there's so much judgment going on here that when you do procrastinate, you're not buying yourself back the rest of your week to do other valued activity. All you're doing is sitting around hating on yourself and being anxious. So that's actually wasting time. So figure out if there's like a negative self-talk here. Like with me, with dissertation, I know that I'm up against all of my feelings of incapability and incompetence. And so every time I go into that bathtub to work on it, I know that what I'm really having to confront is my own fear and anxiety. And so one thing I tell myself is, I'm already doing the worst part of it right now. Getting the thing done is not as bad necessarily as all the shit that I'm telling myself and all this dread I'm experiencing.
Right.
Figure out if somebody responds better to positive reinforcement or to other forms. Like something like the military method works very well for some people. Being called a maggot works well for some people, I guess. It would not for me.
Yeah, and I think the general tip that you're talking about is figuring out what motivates someone, right? It's like the first thing you were saying is laziness is just a judgment on a description of a behavior, right? They're not doing something, I think, that's bad. They're lazy, right? But so exploring why that person's not doing what they're doing, right? And then maybe capitalizing on strengths and motivation, right? Is that person intrinsically motivated, extrinsically motivated by power, affiliation, achievement, right? Like, or trying to understand like what's reinforcing this non-behavior, right? Like every time they don't do something, do you do it? Right. Every time they don't do something, are they able to protect their ego and say like, well, it didn't fail, So, yeah.
Yeah, and then for the people who are dealing with a lazy partner, so I think you've kind of talked about the not reinforcing them. It's interesting how you put it. Laziness is a judgment on a description of a behavior. I think we've been talking a lot about how whether laziness does not exist, it's kind of like, it's just kind of a placeholder word. You can leave somebody for not doing what you need them to do. And that doesn't mean that they're lazy or not lazy. They could have all sorts of justifiable reasons for not. But you can still set your own limits. Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily jump to that. I mean, because there could be a lot about the dynamic that's reinforcing it. Like, yeah, your ex he got into a swing with you where you were the competent one. You were the one who took care of things. And he might have honestly felt afraid of doing things because he couldn't do them up to your level. He couldn't do them the way that you expected them to, you know? And so like, that's something to really examine. But like, if you're just being driven crazy, you feel like you can't leave somebody, you can't set boundaries because of their mental health or whatever, like you have needs too. Yeah.
Right. I mean, when it comes to laziness and in a partnership, often what you're talking about is like an expectation in that partnership, or expectation that one person is asking for someone to do, right? Like, we agreed that he would get a job, or maybe a parent wants a kid to move out of their house, right? There's like an expectation, and that the other person is just not fulfilling it. Yeah. So I do think that a tip is like, validate that it's frustrating, right? It's like, because for you, you're like, oh, it's so easy for them to do it. They can just do it if they do this, right? And part of it is you assuming what's easy for you, like just apply and get a job, or just move out of your own apartment, right? These are all assumptions that would be easy for you to do, or that from an outside perspective you think is just like within their capabilities. But maybe you could take a step back and try to figure out together why that behavior isn't happening, right? What's reinforcing it? Are they motivated to do, right? And just working together on that. And then if, as you're saying, if it just is not, if this is a deal breaker, then just forcing this to happen is not going to work, right? You're just going to have to maybe drop whatever you're doing and just kind of back away from the relationship. Yeah,
I'm having this sort of half-formed thought about, like, this is why there's a strength in removing judgmental words from our vocabulary to an extent, only because there's such shortcuts that we often don't know what we're talking about. Or so, for instance, if you just sat around and called your ex lazy, and that was why you broke up, and I know you've done some of that, and I've done some of it with other judgmental words. That feels different than saying, what I needed in a partnership was XYZ. He did not deliver. That kind of is like almost more empowering language of this is actually what I need and want, and this is how it wasn't met, and it's fine. I'm not going to use judgment here. I'm not going to use judgmentalness here. But I am kind of clarifying with myself what's wrong. I think the same thing with like narcissistic. Like, we broke up because he was a narcissist. We broke up because there were insults. There was controlling behavior in this way. This is not what I expect from a partnership. I need these things. I don't know. Right. I don't know if I'm getting anything across, but
yeah, being like taking the word lazy out of it, right, and just actually describing what's happening.
And we know that works very well for communication purposes. If you just say you're fucking lazy, they're gonna just feel bad. Yeah, definitely. No, I do think that in my case, the laziness term, the judgment came up because it was like, I thought we wanted the same things. Like, we agreed on a plan, or agreed on, a setup and goals together, and then he wouldn't do it. Right. So it would be different if I said, you got to do this, and he was like, I don't wanna, and he didn't. That would be a different problem in my mind of why he wasn't doing what I needed him to do. Yeah. But I thought this was like a collaborative goal, and he was agreeing to it and saying he wanted it, but then he didn't do it. So that's how I viewed it as lazy, because I was like, this is his goal. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't at all, I mean, we're never going to remove judgmental. I mean, how many times have I called my exes psychopaths, lunatics, narcissists, but maniacs was another favorite. But it's not actually very descriptive. It's just sometimes what I say sometimes to bring humor to the situation. Yeah. Or to make it really black and white. Anywho. All right, Hibby. Any resources for our little helpers?
I mean, frankly, no, because we had such a hard time looking up laziness as a concept. But in the spirit of the opposite, I found 2 books. I haven't read them yet, but they look legit. They seem really great, and they kind of dovetail on the things that we've been talking about. So one book is called The Willpower Instinct, How Self-Control Works, Why It Matters, and What You Can Do to Get More of It, by Kelly McGonigal. And then the other one is Following Through, A Revolutionary New Model for Finishing Whatever You Start, by Steve Levinson. So I at least from just what these books look like, they look like a good way to explore why you're not doing something or why your loved one is not doing something, and maybe tapping into different kinds of motivation or your strengths to actually like accomplish that goal. So
fabulous.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, little helpers. Well, you're helpers. You're not lazy. So if you feel like you've been too lazy to give us a 5-star rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, find that internal or external motivation, and go give us a rating, a review, and please subscribe. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.